A tiny mark on a brick holds the secrets of fallen empires. These makers' marks form a vast historical ledger, a hidden archive stamped into clay. By the end of this journey, you will know how to read these codes and see ancient history through the eyes of its builders. We will uncover how a single stamp can pinpoint the origin of stones in a forgotten wall and trace the supply routes that fed entire cities. What story do you think a simple brick could tell if it could speak? That simple mark, X of C Val, is more than just a name. It is a signature pressed into wet clay long before the kiln's fire hardened it for the ages. We are conditioned to see ancient ruins as the work of faceless empires, but these stamps return identity to the anonymous. They transform a broken brick from construction debris into a primary source document, as legible to a trained eye as a page of text. Each stamped brick is a single data point in a vast, sprawling archaeological ledger written in clay and stone. Think of a wall not as a single structure, but as a collection of chapters, each brick a sentence telling its own small story. The stamps themselves are often brief and practical, filled with abbreviations and symbols that were clear to the people of the time. A few letters might signify a workshop owner's name. A simple symbol like a crescent moon or a galloping horse could represent the brickyard itself. Sometimes you even find a consular date naming the Roman officials in power that very year. This coded language turns a forgotten pile of rubble into a readable, almost living archive. The incredible power of this system lies in its very mundanity. Bricks were produced in staggering numbers, used in everything from grand aqueducts to humble shop fronts. Because they were so ordinary, their record is pervasive, found across the entire landscape of the ancient world. And because they were fired, they became incredibly resilient, often surviving even when the buildings they held together crumbled into dust. This changes our entire perspective. We are no longer just looking at a monument. We are seeing the work of Candidus Valerius, a specific person who ran a workshop, employed workers, and fulfilled a contract. His hands, or the hands of his workers, pressed that stamp. His business depended on the orders that came in. This foundational shift from the grand to the individual prepares us to learn the specific language of these marks and start reading the ledger for ourselves. So how do we translate this silent language of symbols and letters? Think of a brick stamp not as a word, but as a complete sentence with its own grammar and rules. The most common element is the name, almost always written in the genitive case. This is the possessive form, so a stamp reading EX of CVL translates directly to from the workshop of Candidus Valerius. It is his property, his responsibility. Some stamps go further, naming the specific estate or brickyard, like Figlini Domitiani, the brickyards of Domitian. Then you have the dating mechanism, the consular year. A stamp might include the abbreviated names of the two consuls who held office that year, effectively giving the brick a precise manufacture date. But the most powerful stamps are those of the empire itself. An imperial stamp does not name a private businessman. It bears the name and titles of the emperor, like a modern government seal. Finding a brick stamped with the name of Emperor Hadrian is not just finding a building block, it is finding a piece of state-authorized production, a direct link to the emperor's own building programs. Even the style of the stamp tells a story. Early Roman stamps are often simple and rectangular, while later ones might use elegant oval frames or intricate borders. The very shape and font of the letters can help an expert narrow down the time period and even the region it came from. A stamp carved in a bold, formal script suggests an official, large-scale operation. A cruder, smaller stamp might point to a local, less formal workshop. This systematic approach turns a collection of scattered marks into a classified library. When you know that a particular combination of letters and a dolphin symbol was only used for a few decades in a specific coastal region, you can instantly identify bricks from that source anywhere you find them. You are not just looking at a mark, you are reading an identity card for the brick itself. Cracking this code is the essential first step, the key that unlocks the true potential of the brick ledger, allowing us to move from identifying a single brick to tracing its incredible journey across the ancient world. This state-controlled brick industry operated with the precision of a modern corporation. From the time of Augustus, the production of bricks for Rome's grandest ambitions was not left to chance. It was a machine meticulously managed by the emperor's own household and the wealthiest senatorial families. Think of these families not just as aristocrats, but as industrial magnates. The Domitii family, for instance, owned sprawling brickyards on the outskirts of the city, their kilns firing countless bricks that would travel to construction sites across the empire. The stamps they used reveal a clear corporate ladder stamped right into the clay. At the top was the dominus, the owner of the estate. Below him was the officinator, the foreman who ran the daily operations of a specific workshop. This hierarchy was not just for show, it was a system of accountability. If a batch of bricks failed, the stamp told you exactly who was responsible from the top down. This level of organization was essential for projects of almost unimaginable scale. Consider the Baths of Caracalla, a monumental complex of pools, libraries, and gymnasiums. Its construction consumed millions of bricks. Without a streamlined, state-directed system to track output, control quality, and manage logistics, such a project would have been pure chaos. The brick stamp ledger was the antidote to that chaos. It allowed the imperial administration to know which brickyards were producing what, and to direct those materials to the correct site with military efficiency. This masterclass in ancient industrial organization reveals a fundamental truth. The Romans did not just build with bricks, they administered with them. Every stamped brick was a tiny piece of paperwork in a vast, empire-wide filing system, one that was literally baked into the walls of history. And this system of control leads to an even more fascinating application, where the stamps were used not just for general supply, but for a single, monumental purpose. The Aurelian walls of Rome stand as a monumental response to crisis, a frantic race against time to protect a city grown vulnerable. Built in a matter of years starting around 271, these massive fortifications were an emergency project on an almost unimaginable scale. But the story of their construction is not just written in their towering height or their long circuit around the city. It is recorded in the countless bricks that form their core, each stamp a tiny clue to a massive logistical operation. When historians began systematically cataloging the maker's marks found on bricks within the walls, a fascinating pattern emerged. They were not all the same. Different sections of the wall, sometimes even individual towers, were built with bricks bearing stamps from entirely different private brickyards. One tower might be constructed almost entirely from bricks stamped by the Domitii family, while the next stretch of curtain wall used bricks from the workshops of Candidus Valerius. This distribution is not random. It reveals a brilliant, pragmatic solution to an enormous problem. Faced with an imminent threat, the state did not have time to centralize brick production in a single location. Instead, it issued a massive commission, effectively contracting every major private brickyard in the region to contribute to the defense of Rome. each contractor was likely assigned a specific section of the wall to build, a specific tower to erect. They then supplied that section with bricks from their own stockpiles and production lines. The stamps are the proof. They act like ancient barcodes, allowing us to trace the origin of each brick and, in doing so, map the entire logistical footprint of the project. This reveals a supply chain that was centrally commanded but locally executed, a perfect fusion of state direction and private industry mobilized for public defense. You can literally walk the length of the Aurelian walls today and see the physical evidence of different construction teams working side by side, their identities preserved in the clay. This single case study transforms our understanding of the brick stamp ledger. We are no longer just identifying workshops. We are watching the anatomy of a single, frantic build take shape, seeing how an empire marshaled its industrial resources in a moment of dire need. If the Aurelian walls show us a system in crisis, the port city of Osta reveals its vibrant, everyday economy. This bustling harbor, the primary gateway to Rome, is an archaeologist's dream, its very foundations built from a chaotic mosaic of stamped bricks. The sheer volume and variety of marks here are overwhelming, a cacophony of names and symbols that, when listened to carefully, tell the story of a living, breathing city. Each stamp is a receipt, an invoice, a record of a transaction that fueled the growth of the ancient world's busiest port. During the reign of Emperor Hadrian, the city underwent a dramatic transformation, and the brick stamps shout this story from the walls. You find his name and title stamped everywhere, a clear signal of massive state investment. This surge in imperial stamps directly correlates with his ambitious building programs, turning Osta into a marble-clad showcase of Roman power and prosperity. But the real magic happens when you look closer at the private workshops supplying this boom. The same stamp from a single brickyard, perhaps owned by a man named Domitius, appears in two very different places. You find his bricks in the foundations of a luxurious apartment building, an insula with shops on the ground floor and wealthy families living above. Then, just a street away, you find the exact same stamp in the thick walls of a horia, a vast utilitarian warehouse storing grain and olive oil. This is a profound detail. It means a single supplier was simultaneously fulfilling a contract for a private developer building luxury housing and for a state contractor building public storage. The lines between state enterprise and commercial business were not just blurred, they were practically non-existent. The brick stamp ledger allows us to trace the life cycle of these commercial dynasties. By mapping the dates on the stamps, we can watch a particular family's brickyard rise to prominence, its mark appearing on dozens of major projects over 50 years. Then, slowly, its stamps become less frequent, replaced by the marks of new, rising workshops. This is the economic heartbeat of the Roman construction industry, measured not in coins but in clay. The rise and fall of a brickyard reflects the health of the entire urban economy, its fortunes tied to imperial favor, market demand, and the simple luck of inheritance. Osta teaches us that these stamps are more than just building codes. They are the fossilized records of ambition, commerce, and the daily flow of goods that kept an empire alive. We can actually measure the economic health of the Roman Empire using these humble brick stamps. Think of a single workshop stamp as a stock ticker for its business. When the empire is thriving under a powerful emperor, construction booms. The stamps of major brickyards appear everywhere, in public baths, new aqueducts, and private villas. Their frequency in the archaeological record soars. Under the reign of the Antonine emperors, for instance, you see a remarkable standardization. Stamps become more uniform in size and style, a clear sign of an industry streamlining itself for maximum output to meet overwhelming demand. This is a signal of economic expansion, recorded not in ledgers but in layers of mortar and clay. Then the picture can change. A stamp that was once found on hundreds of buildings across a region suddenly vanishes from the record. The workshop of a once prosperous family, its name known for generations, simply stops producing. This disappearance is more than just a failed business. It is a tiny data point in a wider economic downturn. Perhaps the family line died out, or maybe a shift in imperial favor redirected contracts to rivals, starving them of work. By counting these stamps, by tracking their rise and fall across decades, historians can assemble graphs of economic activity that feel startlingly modern. They can pinpoint periods of frantic growth, plateaus of stability, and painful recessions that shook the very foundations of the construction trade. These small impressions in clay become a quantitative tool, a way to take the pulse of a market that has been silent for 2,000 years. This economic data, however, is built on the backs of real people. The story of the brick ledger is incomplete without understanding the social world of the men and women whose hands pressed these marks into the wet clay. But these stamps are more than just corporate logos or state seals. They are personal signatures, and the names they preserve reveal a complex social world, from the highest aristocrat to the formerly enslaved. When you see the stamp of Domitia Lucilla, you are not just seeing a mark of quality. You are seeing the business of an emperor's mother, a powerful woman who managed a vast industrial enterprise that supplied bricks for the city's growth. Her name on a brick carried immense social weight, a guarantee of resources and imperial connection. Yet right alongside her stamps, you find the names of freedmen, individuals who began their lives as property. The story of a man named Onesimus is etched into this clay ledger. Early stamps show him listed as a worker, a slave in a large brickyard, but later a stamp appears bearing his name alone, declaring him the owner. This simple progression tells an epic, deeply personal story. Through skill, perhaps through a personal relationship with his former master, Onesimus earned his freedom and then built his own business, climbing the social ladder in a way that was difficult but not impossible in the Roman world. His stamp is a declaration of self-made success, fired into a building block for the empire he helped construct. These personal names transform dry economic data into human drama. The brick stamp ledger acts as an accidental census, recording not just the powerful but the ambitious, the skilled, and the lucky. It gives voice to the countless anonymous hands that built an empire, preserving their identities long after their lives were forgotten. Reading these names, we are reminded that history is not just about emperors and armies, but about the workshop owner who took pride in his craft, the freedman who built a new life, and the countless workers whose labor is literally cemented into the foundations of our world. This human connection makes the next step in our journey even more powerful, as we follow these very bricks beyond a single city to map the arteries of an entire empire. This precise dating power transforms a pile of old bricks into a master clock for the ancient world. A single stamp bearing the names of the 2 consuls for the year provides an absolute date. Think of it like finding a newspaper from a specific day cemented into a wall. When a brick reads, for example, from the workshop of Candidus Valerius in the consulship of Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus, we know it was made in the year 161. That is not an estimate, it is a fact locked in fired clay. This gives archaeologists an anchor point of incredible reliability. But what about bricks that lack this perfect information? This is where the broader chronological framework comes into play. The stamps themselves have a fashion, a history of style that changes over time. Early imperial stamps are often simple rectangles. Later, you see elegant ovals and intricate borders. the lettering evolves from bold, formal capitals to more fluid, sometimes even rushed scripts, and for bricks stamped in the name of the emperor, the titles themselves are a timeline. Emperors listed their tribunician power, a kind of annual authority with a number that increased each year of their reign. A brick stamped with Hadrian's name, and the number for his 5th year of tribunician power cannot date from his 10th. By assembling all these clues, the styles, the titles, the known consular dates, experts build a detailed typological sequence. They can look at an undated stamp and, by comparing its style and wording to dated examples, place it within a window of just a few decades. This process is refined in stratified deposits, where layers of history are physically stacked. Imagine an archaeological trench where a foundation trench from the year 120 is sealed by a floor from 140, which is itself covered by debris from a fire in 170. If stamped bricks appear in each of those clear, dated layers, they become fixed points in the timeline. A stamp found only in the layer from 120 becomes a marker for that period. Find that same stamp in another, unknown building miles away, and you can confidently date that new structure. This master chronology, built brick by brick, turns these humble objects into one of the most trustworthy dating tools in all of Roman archaeology, providing a solid backbone that supports the dating of everything from pottery to coins. With this chronological power secured, we can then ask the next logical question. Where did all these precisely dated bricks actually travel? The journey of a single brick can trace the forgotten highways of an ancient sea. We find the unmistakable mark of the Figlini Marciani, a brickyard just outside Rome, stamped onto bricks recovered from the sun-baked ruins of North Africa and the distant coasts of Hispania. This is more than a simple coincidence of trade. It is a logistical marvel. Bricks are incredibly heavy and bulky, the last thing you would expect to ship across the Mediterranean unless the economics made perfect sense. So why would anyone pay to transport such a common, low-value item across the sea? The answer often lies in the concept of ballast trade. Imagine a massive grain ship, its hold empty after delivering its precious cargo to the port of Osta. Rather than sailing back to North Africa with a dangerously unstable, empty ship, the captain would fill the bottom of his hull with heavy, cheap bricks. He gets the ballast he needs for a safe voyage, and the bricks get a nearly free ride to a distant province where they might be used in a new governor's palace or a legionary fortress. This practice turns every stamped brick found far from home into a clue to a two-way journey, a testament to the complex dance of empty and full ships that kept the Roman economy afloat. But sometimes the reason for transport was not just ballast but sheer necessity. If a remote province lacked suitable clay deposits or the skilled workshops to produce high-quality bricks for an important imperial project, then paying the high cost to ship them from a renowned source like the Figlini Marciani became a necessary expense. By plotting every find spot for a specific stamp on a map, we can draw the economic catchment area of that single brickyard. These distribution maps are like spider webs of commerce, with thick lines radiating from Rome to its major ports and thinner threads reaching deep into the provinces. They make the abstract idea of Roman connectivity suddenly, powerfully tangible. You can see the reach of a Roman businessman, his influence literally cemented into buildings 1,000 miles from his workshop. This incredible network of supply, however, did not run itself. It required a system of management as sophisticated as the transportation itself. The Roman army stamped its identity directly into the clay. A legion was far more than a collection of soldiers. It was a self-sufficient construction army, capable of building the very world it was ordered to conquer and hold. When a legion like the 10th Legion Fretensis settled into a new province, its first task was often to establish its own brickworks. The stamps they produced are unmistakable, bearing the unit's name, its number, and its proud symbols. A stamp reading LEG XFR for the 10th Legion is not just a maker's mark, it is a declaration of presence, a statement that Rome is here to build and to stay. These military stamps are found cemented into the forts along Hadrian's Wall in Britain, the frontier posts along the Danube, and the roads that carved through the deserts of the Middle East. Each one is a tiny piece of a vast, standardized system. The army needed a reliable, uniform supply of building materials for its camps, its fortifications, and its infrastructure, and it could not afford to rely on the uncertain loyalties or variable quality of local workshops. By producing its own bricks, a legion guaranteed both the quantity and the quality of its most essential construction commodity. This in-house production line reveals the army's incredible organizational depth. The stamp itself often went beyond the legion's name, sometimes including the name of the commanding legate or even the specific century that produced the batch. This created a chain of accountability as rigorous as that on the battlefield. If a wall built by the 20th Legion Valeria Victrix showed signs of poor workmanship, the stamps in the crumbling section would point directly to the responsible unit. This practice turns a scattering of old brick stamps into a precise historical ledger of military movement and engineering. Finding a cluster of LEG Roman 3CYR stamps for the 3rd Legion Cyrenaica in a remote part of Jordan does not just tell us the legion was there. It tells us the legion was building there, committing its manpower and resources to a long-term project. By mapping the appearance and disappearance of these stamps, we can trace a legion's march across a province, seeing where it pacified a region and immediately began to cement its control in literal terms. The Roman military brick stamp is therefore one of the clearest fingerprints of imperial power, left behind by the one state institution that could command, produce, and build with its own hands. The decline of the Western Roman Empire did not shatter the brick stamp ledger. Instead, its pages were turned over to new authors who continued the ancient practice of marking clay. In the enduring Eastern Roman Empire, what we call Byzantium, the tradition of stamping bricks continued with a profound cultural shift. The old pagan symbols, the galloping horses and crescent moons, gradually faded away, replaced by the potent new emblem of the empire, the Christian cross. These stamped crosses were not merely decorative, they were declarations of faith and imperial identity, baked into the very fabric of the state's most ambitious projects. The colossal Theodosian walls of Constantinople, which defended the city for 1,000 years, are a monumental archive of this transition. Their bricks bear stamps that often combine imperial monograms with Christian symbols, a clear signal that the state still commanded and quality controlled this essential resource. This is not a broken system but an adapted one, reflecting a new spiritual reality. The same administrative logic applied to the most famous church in Christendom, the Hagia Sophia. Its revolutionary dome, a marvel of engineering, was raised with bricks that carried the marks of their makers, ensuring that the materials for this divine project met the exacting standards of Emperor Justinian's architects. The need for accountability in massive public works transcended the change from pagan Rome to Christian Byzantium. This story of continuity stretches even further into the medieval world. Centuries later, in the rising maritime Republic of Venice, bricks were still being stamped. Here, the marks often invoked the power of the Doge, the city's elected ruler. A brick stamped with the symbol of the Doge was a piece of state-approved material, used in the construction of palaces, bridges, and fortifications that made the Venetian Republic a commercial powerhouse. Finding a Byzantine brick with a cross in the walls of a Venetian building is a powerful reminder of this unbroken thread. the fundamental administrative need to track, quality assure, and take responsibility for building materials persisted for over a millennium. The language of the ledger changed from Latin to Greek to the dialects of Italy, and its symbols evolved from imperial eagles to crosses to the heraldry of city-states. Yet the core principle remained stubbornly the same. Large-scale construction, whether for an emperor, a church, or a merchant republic, demanded a system of control, and the humble brick stamp was one of its most resilient tools. This enduring practice points to a universal truth about how complex societies build, a truth that connects the Roman brickyard owner to the medieval Venetian mason. Their shared legacy in clay prepares us to see these marks not just as ancient artifacts, but as a timeless language of human organization. The Romans may have perfected the art of the brick stamp, but the fundamental challenge of managing monumental construction was a global one. Across the ancient world, from the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia to the frontiers of China, rulers faced the same logistical puzzle. In Mesopotamia, the great kings stamped their legacy not with simple marks, but with entire cuneiform inscriptions pressed into the mud bricks of their ziggurats and city walls. A brick from the time of Nebuchadnezzar II does not name a workshop foreman. It loudly proclaims the king's own name and his divine right to rule, declaring his building achievements for the gods and posterity to see. This was a stamp of royal propaganda, a permanent billboard baked into the fabric of the state. Far to the east, in the meticulously planned cities of the Indus Valley civilization, we find a different approach. They mass-produced bricks of astonishingly uniform proportions, a standardization that implies strong central control, yet these bricks carry no stamps at all. The system was so rigid, the state authority so complete, that individual marks may have been deemed unnecessary. The identity of the builder was entirely absorbed by the state itself. Then, in China, the Qin and Han dynasties developed their own sophisticated system for the greatest state project of all, the Great Wall. Here, bricks and tiles were often stamped with the names of places, military units, and official titles. Finding a brick stamped with a specific county name and the title of an overseeing official allowed the central administration to trace the origin of materials and hold local commanders accountable for the quality of their section of the wall. This Chinese model is a powerful echo of Roman military stamps, a top-down system of state control. Placing the Roman ledger beside these global examples reveals a crucial distinction. While the Mesopotamian system was about royal glory and the Chinese system about military command, the Roman system uniquely wove the private sector into the very heart of state enterprise. It was this fusion, this reliance on a network of private workshops and freedmen entrepreneurs working under imperial direction, that gave the Roman brick stamp its incredible social and economic depth. The Roman achievement was not just in organizing construction, but in creating a detailed, enduring record of the public-private partnership that built their world. Every brick began as a wet, malleable lump of clay pressed into a simple wooden frame, before it could even think of bearing weight. While it was still soft and receptive, the stamp met its surface. This was a moment of physical pressure, not just administrative record-keeping. The worker, the officinator, would take a pre-carved wooden or terracotta die and press it firmly into the clay. The consistency of that clay was everything. Too wet and the impression would blur and slump. Too dry and the stamp would crack the surface, leaving a jagged, incomplete mark. Getting it right required a practiced eye and a skilled hand, a deep understanding of the material itself. Then came the fire, the kiln's intense heat, often reaching temperatures over 1,000 degrees Celsius, did more than just harden the brick. It fused the stamp's impression into a permanent ceramic memory, A kiln that ran too cool might produce a brittle brick with a faint, poorly defined stamp. One that ran too hot could warp the brick entirely, twisting the letters into illegibility. The entire industrial ballet, from the clay pit to the kiln, was geared towards producing not just a building block, but a legible document. Experimental work by archaeologists has shown just how robust this system was. A single, well-carved stamp, made from a hard wood like boxwood, could be pressed into thousands of bricks before its own letters began to wear down and blur. This was not a delicate operation. It was built for speed and endurance on an industrial scale. Even the location of the stamp on the brick itself was a deliberate choice. Most were placed on the long, flat side, the face that would be visible in the wall, turning every finished structure into an open ledger. But sometimes you find stamps on the narrow end, or even hidden on the bottom surface. A stamp on the bottom might have been a simple quality control mark, never meant to be seen again after the brick was laid. One on the top or side could have served as a guide for the masons, telling them which way the brick should be oriented. This physical process connects us to the Roman worker in a profoundly direct way. We are not just reading the name of Candidus Valerius. We are witnessing the physical force his worker applied, the specific consistency of the clay he judged perfect, and the precise heat of the kiln that sealed his work for eternity. The true miracle is that this mundane industrial act, repeated millions of times, accidentally created one of the most durable archives in human history. Fire, which destroys so much, is what preserved this story for us. A single stamped brick is a fragment of a story, but to read the entire book you need more than one language. The full meaning of the brick stamp ledger only emerges at the crossroads of several scholarly fields, each bringing its own essential tools to the table. Archaeology provides the physical stage. It is the discipline that carefully excavates the building, records the precise layer where the brick was found, and understands its relationship to floors, foundations, and other artifacts. An archaeologist tells you whether the brick was part of an original construction or a later repair, context that completely changes its historical significance. Then comes epigraphy, the science of ancient inscriptions. An epigrapher is a master of abbreviation, a decoder of compressed Latin. They understand that the letters LAL might expand to Lucius Aelius, or that the symbol of a palm branch could signify a specific brickyard on an imperial estate. They crack the grammatical code, recognizing possessive forms and official titles that a casual glance would miss. But knowing who made the brick and where it was found is only the beginning. Economic history takes this raw data and builds models. It asks the big questions. What does the sudden concentration of stamps from 5 different workshops in a single small town tell us about regional demand? How does the rise and fall in a brickyard's output reflect broader imperial tax policy or a shift in trade routes? The economic historian transforms a list of names into a graph of ancient market forces. Even the study of coins, numismatics, plays a crucial role. A hoard of coins discovered buried beneath a floor stamped by a specific workshop can provide a tight date range. If the latest coin in that hoard was minted in the year 180, then the floor and its bricks must have been laid sometime after that. This cross-referencing sharpens our chronological tools to a razor's edge. The true power lies in the synergy of all these approaches. A stamp studied in isolation might tell you that a man named Marcus supplied bricks. But when combined with architectural analysis, we might see his bricks were used exclusively in the most expensive, decorated parts of a bath complex. When cross-referenced with historical records, we might discover Marcus was a freedman of the very senator who funded the baths. The isolated fact transforms into a rich narrative of patronage, social mobility, and architectural ambition. This integrated, collaborative method is the future of understanding these material texts. It turns a pile of data into a window onto a living, breathing economy, where every stamped brick is a character in a much larger story. The quiet testimony of a brick stamp can overturn a story told for centuries. Before Emperor Claudius launched his legions across the Channel in 43, the official history suggests Britain was a land of mystery beyond Rome's commercial reach. Yet stamped bricks tell a different tale. Archaeologists have unearthed bricks in southern Britain bearing the marks of private Italian workshops, and these materials date from the reign of Augustus, decades before the invasion. These are not military supplies, but the remnants of trade. They suggest a pre-conquest world where Roman wine, pottery, and building materials were flowing into Britain, likely through elite trade agreements with local chieftains. The presence of these bricks forces a dramatic rewrite of the island's history, revealing not a sudden military conquest, but a gradual economic entanglement that paved the way for the legions. This is the power of the material record to speak where texts are silent or biased. Back in Rome itself, the stamps reveal another quiet truth about imperial vanity. The grand structures of the Forum often carry the names of famous founders, like the Emperor Trajan, but a closer look at the bricks within their cores uncovers a more complex story of upkeep and restoration. Stamps bearing the name of Emperor Septimius Severus, who ruled a century after Trajan, are found deep within the fabric of Trajan's own market complex. This is not a grand new construction, but a critical, unheralded repair job. The literary sources celebrate Severus for his new arches and African campaigns, but they are silent about this essential maintenance. The brick stamp ledger, however, records it plainly. It shows that the survival of Rome's iconic buildings depended as much on these forgotten acts of repair as on their original glorious construction. These discoveries underscore a fundamental principle of archaeology. The written history of Rome was often composed by senators and poets, men with agendas, who might downplay a predecessor's work or ignore the mundane reality of infrastructure upkeep. The brick stamp ledger provides a ground truth. It is a record created not for fame, but for function, a bureaucratic system that accidentally produced an unbiased chronicle. When the texts and the stamps agree, our confidence soars. When they diverge, it is the physical evidence in the clay that often demands we reconsider the past. This makes the humble brick stamp an indispensable tool, a key that can unlock doors the ancient authors themselves tried to keep closed. The staggering scale of the brick stamp ledger, with its tens of thousands of known examples, would have overwhelmed any single scholar just a generation ago. Today, this very abundance is its greatest strength, unlocked by a new field of study known as the digital humanities. Vast collaborative projects like the one at Oxford are systematically photographing, cataloging, and digitizing every stamp they can find, creating a centralized database for the entire Roman world. This is more than just a digital filing cabinet. It is an analytical engine. A researcher can now ask questions that were once impossible to answer. With a few clicks, they can call up every single brick known to have come from the workshop of Domitia Lucilla, creating an instant inventory of her industrial output. Then they can command the map to plot every single one of those find spots, watching as a web of dots spreads across the screen, visually tracing the reach of her enterprise from Rome to the coasts of Gaul. This is not just a map of bricks, it is a map of economic influence. The true power emerges when you analyze the connections. Using a technique called network analysis, scholars can model the invisible links between people. The database might reveal that 3 different aristocratic families all used bricks from the same small cluster of brickyards over a 50-year period. This pattern suggests a tight-knit network of patronage and supply, a business relationship that lasted for generations, hidden in plain sight within the walls of their respective villas and public buildings. This digital turn transforms the ledger from a cabinet of curiosities into a dynamic, searchable dataset for understanding the entire Roman economy. We are no longer just reading individual entries. We are running analytics on the ancient world itself. This technological leap also throws open the doors for anyone to explore. Imagine a student in Tokyo or a history enthusiast in Buenos Aires accessing the same database that scholars use, virtually handling a brick from Osta and reading its story. The humble stamped brick, a tool of ancient administration, has now become a pioneer in the digital archaeology revolution, connecting us to the Roman economy in a way that is both profoundly modern and deeply human. A perfect stamp, clear and legible, is a gift to any archaeologist, but the reality of the ledger is rarely so neat. Many marks are ghosts of themselves, worn down by centuries of wind and rain until only a faint shadow of a letter remains. Others were pressed too lightly into the clay, leaving an impression so shallow it vanished with the first layer of grime. And sometimes the stamp is simply broken, a fragment of a brick that preserves only half a name, turning EX of CVL into a frustrating puzzle of just of C. These physical degradations are just the first layer of mystery. A far greater challenge comes from the constant recycling of the ancient world itself. The Romans were practical builders, and they frequently plundered older, crumbling structures for their materials. A brick stamped for the baths of Caracalla might end up cemented into the wall of a medieval church, its original context completely stripped away. This practice, called spolia, creates a massive historical traffic jam. Finding a brick in a later wall tells you it is older than that wall, but not what its original purpose was. It is like finding a single page from a novel randomly inserted into a different book. You have the text, but you have lost the story. Adding another layer of complexity is the simple fact that not every brick was stamped. The practice was not a universal law. It ebbed and flowed with imperial fashion and local custom. During some periods, like the High Empire, stamping was rampant. In other times, or in certain provinces far from Rome, the practice was sporadic or even non-existent. This means the absence of a stamp on a brick in a grand public building does not automatically mean it was not part of a state project. It might simply mean it came from a brickyard that did not bother with marks that year, or from a region where the habit was uncommon. This forces archaeologists to be detectives of silence, to understand that the gaps in the data are as meaningful as the data itself. They must constantly weigh the evidence, asking if a pattern they see is a true signal of ancient activity or just a random cluster of surviving stamps. They are piecing together a vast mosaic where most of the tiles are lost forever, using the few that remain to infer the shape of the whole image. This probabilistic dance, this careful acknowledgement of limits, is not a weakness of the brick ledger. It is the very essence of rigorous history, a humble reminder that we are always reading a partial document, and that the most honest stories are often those that openly admit their own missing pages. These stamps are the physical ghost of Roman bureaucracy. Every time a worker pressed that wooden die into the clay, he was not just marking a brick, he was enacting a system of imperial control, making the abstract idea of administration permanently, physically real. This is a concept known as embedded literacy. Even if the laborer himself could not read the letters he was stamping, his actions were part of a vast, literate system of tracking and accountability. The brick itself became an unwilling agent of the state, a tiny ceramic bureaucrat carrying its mark of authority and quality assurance to the farthest corners of the empire. This fusion of the material and the administrative is one of the most powerful ways to understand how ancient states actually worked. Power was not just exercised through armies and laws. It was baked into the very building blocks of daily life, creating a world that was legible and manageable to its rulers. Think of a modern barcode on a product in a warehouse. The worker scanning it may not know the product's entire supply chain, but the act of scanning integrates that item into a global system of logistics and control. The Roman brick stamp was that ancient barcode. It allowed a central administrator in Rome to theoretically audit a wall in North Africa, to see which workshop supplied the materials and, by extension, who was responsible for its quality. This system created a legible empire out of a sprawling, diverse collection of territories. For the state, a stamped brick was not just a construction material. It was a piece of standardized, accountable data. This materialization of bureaucracy solves a fundamental problem of pre-industrial governance. How do you manage complexity without computers or instant communication? The Romans answered by turning their most basic building material into a hard copy filing system, one that was fireproof, waterproof, and built to last millennia. The stamp transformed the chaos of mass production into an ordered ledger, and in doing so, it gave the state a tangible grip on its own ambitious scale. This philosophical view shifts our perspective once more. We are no longer just tracing supply routes or dating buildings. We are witnessing how an empire thought, how it imposed its rational will upon the world, one stamped brick at a time. That stamp pressed into the clay was more than a name, it was a legal signature. It transformed a simple building block into a certified product, backed by a system of accountability we would recognize today. This legal dimension was crucial for the complex contracts that underpinned Roman construction. Imagine a private citizen commissioning a new insula or a state official overseeing an aqueduct. They were not just buying bricks, they were purchasing a guarantee. If a wall, built from bricks stamped by the workshop of Candidus Valerius, were to crack or collapse prematurely, that stamp provided the evidence needed to trace liability back to its source. The stamp was a baked-in warranty, a direct link to the manufacturer who could be held responsible for his product's failure. This was ancient risk management on a grand scale. We even find stamps that make this official oversight explicit. An inscription like CPBR, which stands for Cura Ponderibus Bono Romano, translates to under the supervision of the Roman Weights and Measures Office. This was not a private mark, it was a government seal of approval. A brick bearing this stamp had been verified for standard size and, by implication, proper quality. It was the Roman equivalent of a modern building code compliance stamp, certifying that the material met official state specifications. This system created a foundation of trust that enabled massive, expensive projects to proceed. A senator funding a new bath complex could be confident that the millions of bricks he was purchasing were not only from a known source, but were also produced under a system that enforced standards. The stamp distributed the immense financial and safety risks of large-scale construction across a chain of accountable parties, from the brickyard owner down to the workshop foreman. This legal framework reveals a remarkably sophisticated understanding of economics. The Romans had built a world where trust was not just a vague concept, but was physically embedded into the very fabric of their cities, one guaranteed brick at a time. Even the most practical Roman stamp was often a small work of art. Look closely at one, and you might see its letters are not just scrawled onto the surface. They are carefully arranged inside a decorative frame known as a tabula ansata, a carved representation of a stone tablet with two curved handles on the sides. This was not a necessary functional element. It was a deliberate aesthetic choice, a moment of formal beauty pressed into an industrial object destined to be hidden in a wall. The very shape of the letters tells its own story of changing tastes across the centuries. In the confident early empire, stamps often feature elegant, deeply carved letters with fine serifs, those small finishing strokes at the ends giving the impression of authority and care. By the 3rd century, you see a shift. The lettering often becomes blockier, less refined, sometimes even slightly rushed. This stylistic evolution is more than just a change in fashion. It is a reflection of the times, a subtle signal of an industry that was perhaps streamlining its processes or facing different economic pressures, with the aesthetic quality of the stamp mirroring the broader state of the empire itself. Beyond the letters and frames, some stamps incorporate tiny pictures that function like ancient corporate logos. A brickyard located near the Tiber River might use a small image of a galley ship, instantly identifying its products and their connection to the bustling river trade. Another workshop might choose the symbol of a boar or a dolphin, creating a simple, memorable brand that could be recognized by literate and illiterate workers alike. This blending of pure utility with a clear sense of design is profoundly revealing. It tells us that even in the smoky, clay-spattered environment of a brickyard, the Romans held a deep-seated value for order and visual appeal. The stamp was never meant to be a hidden serial number. It was graphic design for the masses, a small, beautiful claim of ownership and quality that was intended to be seen, read, and remembered by everyone who walked past the finished wall. The stamp tells us who made the brick, but the brick itself reveals where it was born. Within the very fabric of the clay, locked in its mineral matrix, lies an environmental archive waiting to be read. Scientists use a technique called petrographic analysis, which involves slicing a brick into a thin section so fine that light passes through it, revealing a hidden universe under the microscope. In this tiny window, they can identify the specific mineral inclusions, the tiny grains of quartz or feldspar, and the volcanic rock fragments that were naturally present in the original clay deposit. These mineral signatures are like a geological fingerprint unique to certain regions. A brick stamped with the name of a workshop outside Rome might, under analysis, show a mineral profile that perfectly matches the volcanic soils near Pozzuoli, a city famous for its pulvis puteolinus, the special ash that made Roman concrete so strong. This tells us the brick was not just made by that workshop, but that the workshop sourced its raw materials from that specific, distant quarry. This scientific approach resolves mysteries that stamps alone cannot. For instance, a stamp might only give a name, Candidus Valerius, with no location mentioned. Petrography can analyze his bricks found in Rome and confirm they were made from the distinct sandy clay dredged from the Tiber River, proving his brickyard was local. Or it might reveal the opposite, showing his clay came from a source hundreds of miles away, forcing us to redraw the map of his supply network. This turns every brick into a piece of a paleo-environmental puzzle. By analyzing the clay fabrics from a single city over centuries, we can track how resource extraction strategies evolved. Did builders in Osta initially use local coastal clays, only to switch to superior Tiber Valley clays as demand increased and quality became more important than proximity? The bricks hold the answer. This layer of data moves us beyond ledgers of people and places and into the realm of ancient landscapes and resource economics, reading the story of the earth itself, written in fire-hardened clay. This vast ledger of clay is not a closed book for scholars alone. Its pages are scattered all around us, waiting for anyone with a curious eye to learn their language. With a simple, clear guide, an amateur archaeologist walking a plowed field after a rainstorm can spot a fragment of orange terracotta, turn it over, and find the distinct impression of letters. That moment of recognition, of connecting a name in a book to a physical object in your hand, is a powerful form of time travel. Community science projects are now harnessing this potential, inviting history enthusiasts to photograph and log stamps they encounter on old walls, in riverbanks, or even embedded in their own local garden walls. Every submitted image becomes a new data point, potentially pinpointing the journey of a Roman brick to a place no academic has ever thought to look. Museums have embraced this democratic spirit by creating stunning displays of these marked bricks, arranging them in vast, tactile walls where visitors can run their fingers over the same letters a Roman worker once pressed. A mundane object is transformed into a direct physical link to an individual who lived 2,000 years ago. This public participation is vital, especially for materials found in secondary contexts, those bricks reused in a medieval barn or a modern flowerbed that would otherwise never enter an official archaeological report. By opening the ledger to everyone, we are not just expanding a database, we are building a community of decoders, each person finding their own connection to the past through a piece of history they can literally hold in their hands. This collective effort ensures that the stories hidden in these stamps will continue to be found, read, and remembered for generations to come. The future of this ancient ledger is now being written in lines of code and beams of laser light. We are entering a new golden age of discovery, driven not by shovels alone, but by technologies that allow us to see these stamps in ways their creators never could imagine. LiDAR, which uses lasers to map the Earth's surface from the air, can reveal the ghostly outlines of long-buried Roman roads and villas, guiding archaeologists directly to sites where new stamps await. Once a stamped brick is unearthed, photogrammetry takes over. This technique involves taking hundreds of overlapping photographs of an object from every angle, stitching them together into a perfect, measurable three-dimensional digital model. A researcher in London can then virtually rotate a stamp found in Spain, examining the depth of each letter's cut and the tool marks left by the Roman craftsman, all without the original ever leaving its home museum. This is not just about preservation, it is about unlocking microscopic details invisible to the naked eye. The science goes even deeper into the very chemistry of the clay. Isotope analysis, a method that reads the unique signature of elements like strontium and lead, holds the promise of pinpointing the exact clay pit a brick came from. While a stamp might tell us the brickyard was owned by Domitia Lucilla, isotope analysis could one day reveal which specific stream bank her workers dug from, tracing the ultimate origin of the raw material itself. Perhaps the most transformative tool on the horizon is machine learning. The sheer volume of fragmentary stamps is a monumental challenge, but it is the perfect task for a trained algorithm. By feeding thousands of images of clear and damaged stamps into a computer, we can teach it to recognize patterns. Soon, an archaeologist might simply upload a photo of a faint, worn impression, and the algorithm could cross-reference it with the entire known database, suggesting a probable match and restoring a lost name to the ledger. Every year, ongoing excavations at time capsules like Pompeii and Osta add new pages to this archive, refining our chronological sequences and economic models with fresh, undeniable data. The ultimate ambition is staggering: to weave this entire system into a digital twin of the Roman economy. Imagine a dynamic, interactive map where you can watch the output of a single brickyard pulse across the empire year by year, see its bricks travel along animated shipping routes, and observe its rise and fall in relation to imperial edicts and market forces. This living model would not just describe the ancient world, it would allow us to test theories against its complex, data-rich reality. The silent language of the brick stamp is finally finding its voice, amplified by the tools of the 21st century. From a single stamped brick, we have journeyed through the entire anatomy of an empire. This humble mark opens a window onto a world of complex economics, sprawling logistics, and deeply human social history, all governed by a system of administration of breathtaking genius. The Roman brick stamp ledger stands as one of history's most remarkable inventions, a decentralized, fireproof, and accidentally permanent filing system. It transformed common building materials into a vast, tangible record of how the world worked. These small impressions make visible the invisible networks that pulsed with life, the ceaseless flow of people, goods, and imperial commands that bound a continent together. They whisper a crucial truth that history is not only composed of grand battles and imperial decrees written on fragile parchment. It is also stamped indelibly into the clay beneath our feet, in the very stuff of everyday life. So the next time you walk past an old brick wall, perhaps in a centuries-old building or a forgotten corner of a city, pause for a moment, look closely at the weathered surfaces. You are not just looking at construction, you may very well be gazing at a single, open page from an ancient ledger, a line from a story waiting for someone to read it. We would love to hear what you find. Have you ever noticed a strange mark on an old brick? Share your own observations or any potential discoveries in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the silent language of the past, subscribe for more explorations into the world's greatest historical mysteries.